Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this brief ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Beginning first with the month-to-date total precipitation by rank for each climate district here, we can see that broad sections of the United States in November have been drier than average. Without a strong subtropical component of the jet stream, these are areas that have really missed out on having above normal precipitation. We have seen some drought expand in parts of the desert Southwest, parts of the high plains getting into Texas, and from the lower Mississippi River Valley, there's been drier pockets through here, but we've seen drought expand into the Carolinas and parts of the mid-Atlantic. Where it's been wetter, interior parts of New England, much of the northern plains into the upper Midwest, and then in the Pacific Northwest. And as we look at this, we can correlate this pretty well to what's going on with our La Niña. With the trade winds still strong to about this point, the nose of that cold water extending to that area in the Pacific Ocean. But Niño region 1 and 1+2, that's kind of this area here, has continued to get colder, as has this region right here in the Gulf of Alaska. And all of those pieces kind of stitched together tell us what the Pacific Ocean is doing at this point. And it's mostly dominated by a La Niña-like pattern. That's influencing the PDO. It's also influencing the MJO. We're going to talk about both in just a second here. That PDO, the cooler water that you see extending here with the warmer extension in the Central Pacific, is just really well timed with the whole strengthening of the trade winds over the last about 45 to 60 days. On the MJO side of it, well, you're going to see in a few moments why we continue to favor this area, phases 5 and 6 in the near term, given the interplay with the trade winds here and some westerly winds coming out of the Indian Ocean. But just to show you this, whenever we typically have a La Niña, precipitation in November, wherever you see reds, that's where it tends to be drier, and the blues tend to be wetter. And you can kind of see where it was, right? It was in and around the eastern Great Lakes. It was in the northern plains and through here, and then definitely in the Pacific Northwest, while these regions tended to be drier, so it's playing out quite well. How about on the temperature side of it? This is what our temperatures look like month to date, and we tend to favor more warm conditions over the southwest, but when there's been cold air let out, it's come through just like this, as we've talked about, from the Canadian Prairie through the Midwest and Great Lakes into the east. We would also say that that's pretty typical. You correlate November temperatures with the colder water in the Central Pacific, and where you see these bluer colors, I know it may not seem intuitive at all, but that's where it's warmer because of the negative correlation. We're cooler in the northwest, cooler in the northern plains, and the cold air gets let out to the east. So a lot of this is playing well with what the tropical forcings would suggest for this time of year. Now, where are we going? The MJO appears to be going into phases 5 and 6, and I have questions as to whether or not it'll ever make it into phase 7 or even over to 8 and 1 until this La Niña begins to fade. And so if it goes to phase 5 and eventually to phase 6, this is what you end up getting. Phase 5 is a trough here, a ridge over the west, deeper trough in the east. Big blocking ridge, we call that part of the negative NAO pattern in the North Atlantic, and we're cold over Europe where there's another trough. Now, if you look at phase 5 and then you flip it over to phase 6, the pattern just progresses east. Ready? So phase 5 into phase 6. Now we get a really powerful extension of the Pacific Jet into the northwest. The ridging happens in the midsection of the country. The cooler conditions move on off to the north and east, and so does the ridge. It starts to move as well toward Europe. Now, I show you that because of this. But what we're going to look at next, let's get this out here, is what the jet stream pattern in terms of trough and ridges are going to do. So playing through this week into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, let's just get this out toward the weekend. You see, by the time we get to Saturday this week, when the MJO will be firmly into phase 5, there's a trough here, ridge over the west, trough in the east, big blocking ridge, part of the negative NAO pattern there over the North Atlantic, and look at the trough over Europe. Now look at that and then compare it to this. Trough, ridge over the west, deeper trough in the New England area. There's that blocking ridge and the colder conditions over Europe. That almost lines up perfectly with what we've got here. Now, the projections are different, but that's what you got. Then as we progress to the end of November and start December, let's just get out there to December, 2nd or 3rd. There's the extension of the Pacific Jet hammering the northwest. Weak ridging in the midsection of the country. The trough moves out of New England. The ridge breaks down and starts to move toward England and toward, Western Europe, and the ridge moves with it. This downstream trough, put an X in it, goes with it. And if you notice, that's what we seem to get here. See how everything progresses. So the connection between this La Niña and the MJO working in concert seem to be driving our next 10 days. And what do we end up getting out of that? Well, with more ridging in the midsection of the country to the east, we're going to be seeing, in through this area, drier conditions. All the action is always downstream of the trough. That goes here or here into British Columbia, which is going to get absolutely hammered over the next several days. And while we see this precipitation pattern, this is what the temperatures on average are going to do for the next 10 days. The jet stream flow does a lot of this. That's deeper troughs into the east. Warmth spreading at times into the plains and into the Canadian prairie. So thinking about all of that, I now want to add one more piece of this. We'll look at the long range and then dig into the near-term stuff. This La Nina, how long is it going to last? Well, if we take a look at the latest ocean temperature graphic here, what you're going to see is from South America, which is here, to Australia, which is there, then going down in ocean depth here. There's a lot of warm water downwelling here and cold water still expected to come up to the surface there. We're going to see this for probably the next 45 days or so, because if you look, the Niña region 3.4 right in the middle of the Pacific, it's cooled off through September and October, brief warm up in early November, but it's come back here. And if I could just keep drawing this, I think that around January the 15th, I'll just put a date on it, somewhere around January 15th, we're going to reach the peak of this, and it's going to start to go back up. And when that happens, those trade winds relax, the MJO finally moves into the Western Pacific. We get a whole different look for the second half of winter. At the same time, got to keep a close eye on the polar vortex. It's strong right now. I do not see any disruptions in the near term. But possibly mid-January, I'll be watching for some sort of stratospheric warming event that could possibly impact the polar vortex. So what does that leave us with? Well, if we just take a look at what the new forecast is for December, you can see here that precipitation-wise, increasing the precip amounts in the West Coast, even into the San Joaquin Valley. But without the strong subtropical component, much of the southern part of the United States is drier. It's active with a lot of clippers coming through the U.S.-Canada border, and I expect systems to develop in the Ohio River Valley, in the mid-Mississippi Valley, and we see above-average precipitation there. I buy into this forecast right here for December really strongly. On the temperature side of it, it's going to be a bit misleading because what you notice here is a lot of warmth in the midsection of the country. Now, yeah, this is coming in the next 10 days, but it doesn't stick around for like the whole of December. I want you to be aware of that. And since we're looking at these longer range forecasts, we know that Europe throughout much of December is going to favor colder weather as well. We got to keep a close eye on that. And I also want to show you, let's go to Australia. Australia's had a very wet November so far, and because of the position of the nose of those trade winds and what we expect in terms of the behavior of La Nina and the MJO, we're going to continue to see above average precipitation moving forward. So I wanted to give you that international perspective here. All right, what are we dealing with in the near term? There we go. Let's get this out here and let's take a look at both the GFS and the European. What we've got here is we play through the day on Tuesday, getting into Wednesday. High pressure dominates the East Coast. Got some scattered flurries coming through on Wednesday here into the northern plains. But what ends up occurring is that by the time we get to Thursday, we end up getting high pressure over South Carolina, high pressure over South Dakota, and the flow comes around it like that. So we squeeze the air in between, get frontogenesis. So we're going to start off Thursday morning with some showers from Texas to Indiana. And as we play through the day, that front moves east. And behind it, we get some lake effect snow. That's the second round of it because we got some lake effect snow going on now. Maybe by Friday morning, some snow up in the Appalachian Mountains and then snow into the interior parts of New England. And while that's occurring, just take note. We do have the greatest onshore flow into British Columbia, but parts of Washington and the Northern Rockies are going to get this as well. So that gets you through Friday. Let's now work into the weekend. That low curls up into the northeast, so more lake effect snow possible. And the models are attempting on Saturday into Sunday to bring a little clipper system down through here. The European is more aggressive on that through Saturday into Sunday morning. It is actually there, the same features there in the GFS. We're just not seeing the heavier precipitation from it. So we're just going to watch that system this weekend curling out of the Red River Valley of the north over to the Ohio River Valley in the eastern Great Lakes. Then working into early next week, again, with the ridge redeveloping here, most of the jet stream, speed and momentum tackles the Pacific Northwest. But broader ridging in through here is going to keep things on the quieter side of things. So if we stitch that all together, let's just add up this precip. Lake effect snow to begin with. British Columbia targeted. This is through Wednesday. And then as we get into Thanksgiving, this will be the area here that I'll watch for additional precip on Thanksgiving in the midsection of the country. We then know that over the weekend, there's a little clipper that comes down through here. Watch it again on Saturday, Sunday. And then that pulls into the Appalachian Mountains and eventually into the Northeast. Now, while that's all occurring here, what I want you to take note of is the onslaught of flow into the Pacific this part of Washington, but mainly into British Columbia. That's where it's going to be quite wet. If we talk about the snowfall forecast, I'm just going to give you an update here. Accumulated snowfall departure from the 2008 to 2020 average. We can see that there's a few places here that are above average. All right, some downwind of the Great Lakes, northern Minnesota, and this part of Wyoming and Montana. That was mainly from the October 13th system. But due to that big event we had back in October and the continual flow into the northwest, we do see some of the mountains doing okay, but the rain shadow really in effect here. Our next 7 days or so, lake effect snow, some coming up in the Appalachian Mountains, so be careful traveling home after the weekend, and interior New England. All right, you can also see in this part of Ontario and Quebec heavier snow. Snow is pretty far north in Canada, just light snow in this area if anything, but we may get several feet of snow up here in this part of British Columbia. From there, let's take a look at another way of getting an eye on this pattern. The next 10 days, what's color shaded for you here is the probability of getting a half inch of rainfall or any type of precipitation or less. Okay, liquid equivalent. It's going to be relatively dry across broad swaths of the Canadian prairie, the United States, and parts of the Southeast as well. Okay, the central United States and the Southeast. From here, let's go take a look at what happens when we begin December. Starting in December, flow screaming into this area, MJO phase 6. Trough moves out, ridge builds in, right? But then we're going to notice that a piece of that trough cuts in December 3rd, 4th, and 5th, right there. So what happens with this pattern is getting out that far, heavy onshore flow, or strong onshore flow, here. When that trough digs through, we're going to bring a system in through here during that first week of December. That's why we see some above average precipitation in this area. Temperature-wise, as we wrap this up, this is the potential for frost over the next 7 days, everything you see in gray here. And I'll just tell you something, we've got some cold air making it to the east here very soon. To give you an idea about this was Monday's highs. We've already seen these highs. Tuesday, look at the warm-up in the midsection of the country while the cold air exits east. As we go from Tuesday into Wednesday, there's a brief warm-up here, but you saw it. There's cold air coming in behind this. That's where that front was setting up on Thursday. So there's another shot at cold air, but as you can imagine, with the ridge rebuilding in the west and expanding into the plains, going into this weekend, the cold air stays east and the warm air returns across a broad section of the United States and Canadian prairie. And looking out there at day 5 through 10, that's what you see, right? The warmer air here and the cooler air in place there. And as we know, moving to MJO phase 6, this whole pattern shifts east. So what do we get? This is day 10 through 15. And that would be when we start to just target the northwest with the heavy precipitation again. So that's what I'm looking at now. Gives you both the long-term and the short-term update. And I'll talk to you again later this week on Friday. I'm going to take Thanksgiving Day off, and we'll give you a new update on Friday. Appreciate your attention. Thank you.